been a few weeks since my last video, and I don't like leaving it too long in between each episode, but the weather's just causing me non-stop problems. I don't mind the cold, but I can't safely weld outside when it's snowing, and I'm currently waiting on a skip so I can get all the rubbish removed so I can actually get the car outside to weld. Episode 17 was supposed to be the welding of the toe board, but because of the bad weather that's going to have to be episode 18, but should be ready and finished in the next week or so. It is actually starting to take shape, so I just need a few days dry weather and then I can get all that finished. Anyway, early on in the build someone asked me a question about the tools that I needed to restore a classic Mini. At the time I had no idea as I hadn't finished stripping it down, but now it's been fully stripped I have a bit better of an idea, but I also realise that putting everything back is going to require even more tools. So with the weather not wanting to play ball, and not wanting to leave too big a gap between each video, I thought I'd use this as an opportunity to take a quick look at some of the tools that I've either used or should have used to strip down my Mini, and I've entitled it Part 1, as Part 2 will be later on once I've finished the build to see what other tools I've had to buy to put it all back together again. I'll make a list and add it into the description below the video in case it's of use to anyone else, and feel free to add any tools that you might think I've missed or that I might need for the future in the comment section. I spent a few hours trying to remember what tools that I've used, and each time I look back I spot something that I've missed out. So I've no doubt that despite my best efforts, I'm bound to have missed something from the list, but hopefully I remember most of the tools that I've used. I thought the easiest way for me to go through what tools I have used is to start way back at episode 1 and work my way back through looking at all of the tools that I've used in each video, and at the end I'll try and work out how much it have all cost me. This may also help people decide whether there's any saving in doing the work themselves, or whether leaving it to a professional is a more cost-effective solution. If you happen to own all of the tools already, then there's obviously a huge savings to be made doing the work yourself, especially if you've got the skills. But if you're just starting from scratch and only thinking about doing the work to save money, it could actually be cheaper having someone else do the work, but obviously that comes down to personal choice. It seems so long ago since I first bought the car, but in episode 1, straight away, removing the battery required a set of spanners. This set cost me around £100 when I bought them from a case catalogue in the 1990s, which also came with a few other tools as part of a starter toolkit when I bought my first Mini nearly 30 years ago, although I no longer have the original cantilever box. The gloves that I'm wearing were a recent purchase of PPE for the restoration, and I bought quite a few of these at a couple of pound a pair. Adding things like this to the list seems trivial, but every single purchase adds up and eats away at the budget. The wheel chocks I bought for the restoration, as well as the car jack, and was vital to the strip down. The kneeling mat I already had, as well as a plastic container for catching fluids. But the wrench in my hand was a new purchase from Machine Mart, where I bought 2 sets of various sized sockets, and I also bought the car creeper. The screwdrivers I already owned, but they aren't in the greatest condition and will likely need replacing. Now the pen's obviously not relevant in this shot, but what is relevant is a Haynes manual which I bought right at the start of the restoration, along with a couple of other Mini related manuals. And having a latex allergy, I had to buy these non-latex gloves in bulk by the hundreds. This screwdriver came free with a previous car and it's reversible and it's been quite handy at times. Pin removal tool was a recent purchase and it did the job, but it's not the best metal, and to be fair it's not brilliant quality and it's deformed after only a few hits, but it did do the job that it was intended to do. The ball joint splitter was another tool that I had to buy, which I got from Minisport. It is quite fiddly to use, but it does work quite well. Now, although not strictly a tool, I did need a workshop, and if you've been following my videos you'll know that after discovering an underground water course, this cost around £10,000 to sort out, and because of the issues that followed I couldn't actually build a car workshop anymore, and ended up having to put the car in my wood workshop. That's all well and good, but means now that any grinding and welding has to be done outside for obvious safety reasons. Now in episode 2, Dennis from Classic Retro and Restorations popped down to help. Whilst Dennis used a lot of my tools, he did bring along some tools that I didn't have, and I've either since bought them or I've stuck them on my list of things to buy. One thing that seems pretty useful, and something that I've not bought yet, is this impact driver. Everyone keeps advising me to get one, and I really wish that I had, as there's been many occasions where I really needed one. The axle stands were something else that I had to buy. Now these are only small, but it's still a tighter fit to get under the car with the car being so low. Now whilst I bought the socket sets, there were 2 sockets in addition to the sets that I needed to buy, this being one of them. This is for the tower bolts, and I can't remember off the top of my head which socket's which, but I had to buy 2 specialist sockets which are the tower bolts, the brake hubs and the steering wheel, and they're shown in this picture. In episode 3, the only real additional tools that I needed to buy now were a hacksaw and a Stanley knife. As previously mentioned, I had to buy the 2 additional sockets, one of which can be required for the steering wheel nut, but I just opted to remove the entire steering column instead, so I'll remove the steering wheel at a later date. In episode 4 I had the shell blasted. It does highlight an additional cost if you're looking to have a somewhat clean slate to start the work on, once everything is fully stripped down, because otherwise you'd have to find some way of removing the paint, the rust and any filler. Now you could of course do this by hand, but that would be a lot of hard work. Episode 5 was more of a reality check about how much things were actually starting to cost, but in episode 6 I realised that to work safely on the car I needed to somehow store all the parts that I'd removed, and I bought lots of tough plastic boxes, and also needed some way to move the shell around, which resulted in purchasing a rollover jig so I could access all of the bodywork and wheel it in and out of the workshop when required. I also tried organising my tools a little bit better, so I built a few storage racks. Now the rolling jig's really good, but to make it better I painted it with hammerite, just to give it that added protection. It definitely looks a lot better, but it's little things like this that add up, as you then need to buy things like degreaser and rags and sandpaper, paintbrushes, masking tape, white spirits, etc. And even drill bits I needed to purchase to make slight adjustments to the jig. Now I know the car is pretty much stripped down now, but I have bought more items in preparation to rebuilding the car. I might as well add them to the list now, although they are more relevant to the rebuild. Firstly, as I'm doing the bodywork repairs, I bought this welder, the Clark 135TE, and I've already done a short video on this, so I won't go into too much detail. But this is vital to the build, and if I'm honest, I'd probably benefit from the spot welder that they sell too. But of course, when you buy a welder, that also means you've got to buy the gloves, the visor, the gas and so on. I also bought myself a set of car ramps, which I've had to use a few times already, and when I bought these I also bought myself an engine crane. The crane's been really useful, but it didn't like being wheeled across the riven flags that I have outside, and seems obviously more suited to a flat surface, which probably comes down to the tiny wheels on the crane. There's still other parts of the car that are removed to strip down yet, and some of these require additional tools. For example, the front subframe was easy enough to do, but one thing that I should have bought was a tool to remove the roller bearings on the suspension top arms, and if you've seen one of my previous videos you'll see that I really struggled to get them out. And then there's also the engine to strip. This is really when I wish I'd bought the impact driver as mentioned earlier, as well as an engine stand. But to help with the engine strip down I ended up having to buy a long leverage bar, as some of the bolts were really tight. One thing that's definitely worth spending a little bit of money on is a decent flywheel puller. Now I learned the hard way, and I bought cheap, which caused multiple issues, but if I had to recommend one puller, it'd definitely be worth investing in the Guessworks flywheel puller. So I'll bring part 1 to a close as I'm now in the process of rebuilding, and expect I'll need to look at a whole new set of tools as I progress further. But hopefully for anyone thinking of restoring a classic Mini, maybe the video will give some idea of what's required to actually strip the car down. It's strange in a way that you could get away with minimal tools for stripping the car down, but if I'm honest, having certain tools makes the job so much easier and much safer. And this is obviously not a definitive list by all means and will vary between models, and cost wise it depends on what tools that you may already own. But even though I owned a good selection of tools before I started, I've still found that I've had to buy quite a lot of tools and equipment. Depending on how this build goes, I do hope to rebuild and restore a Clubman at a later date, so I have no issue other than that of available funds for purchasing tools. But if this was a one-off build and it was all about weighing up the cost of having a professional carry out the work or myself, probably leaning toward the fact now that it was probably more cost effective in the long run to have had it restored professionally. Although the major drawback to that is that I'd have had to have the money up front all in one go, which I didn't, and that was the main reason why I had to opt to carry out the work myself. But the bonus being the knowledge that I've gained so far, owning a whole new workshop full of tools, and just as important, if not more important, it's introduced me to a whole new set of Mini enthusiasts from the various groups and meetups, and many of which I can now call friends. It just so happened as well that while I was editing the video I was able to get a skip ordered and remove all the crap from the driveway, so I can finally get the car rolled out and get on with the tow board for episode 18. Prior to making the videos on YouTube, I worked as a firefighter for nearly 20 years, serving my community and helping to save lives and promote the fire safety message. Unfortunately, an accumulation of many upsetting scenes became too much for my mind to cope with, and after years of failed therapy I was retired from the service on the grounds of ill health and signed off medically from any employment. To keep myself busy, both body and mind, I developed an interest in woodworking and car mechanics, and with already having a hobby in filming and music, I combined my interests and started making videos here on YouTube, filming, editing and composing my own music for my woodworking and car restoration channels Smugwood and Smugwood Mini. Unfortunately, to produce such videos comes at a price, and with minimal funds after being retired from employment, I've turned to Patreon to see if there is additional support out there which could allow me to continue making the woodworking and car restoration videos. In return for support, there are various levels which are explained in more depth at the Patreon link below, but includes the chance to win one of my YouTube projects made throughout the year, and also inclusion into random prize draws open to patrons only. In addition, I'd like to thank everybody who already subscribes to my channels, or watches, comments, likes and shares them, as it all goes to help support my channels, and for that I'm really appreciative. It's my hope that I can continue making the videos for the foreseeable future. Thanks once again for your continued support.